So, our final speaker of the day is Jessica Hische. Jessica is a lettering artist and author living in Oakland, California, who has worked with such clients as Starbucks, Fender Guitars, Wes Anderson, and the US Postal Service. She was named a Forbes 30 Under 30 and ADC Young Gun, and in 2018, she was listed as one of Adweek's Creative 100. She also has a special dance that she knows when she's particularly excited that her friends call the pony dance. Maybe we'll get to see that. I don't know. Maybe for good. And just to remind you, after her talk, she's also going to be signing books on the expo floor just beneath us. That's the floor where you did your registration this morning. So come grab a book, get it signed, have a chat with her. So yeah, please give a warm round of applause for Jessica Hische.
Hi, everyone. So nice to be here. I have only ever been in Amsterdam for like less than 40 hours, though, and this trip is also that. So someday I will come back and see all of your fine city, and that'll be cool. Does anyone here have ASMR? That's like the thing when your brain tickles when you listen to certain sounds? Yeah. So these videos here, like I watch these at like 11 o'clock at night, like on my phone on Instagram, these like slime motion videos. So the whole day I've been like, don't stare at the video. It'll make you feel too weirdly excited. I don't know, I just thought I'd bring that up. So anyway, my talk today is called Finding Yourself Over and Over Again. Who here went to Lauren's talk this morning? Yeah, a bunch of folks. There's going to be some overlap in concepts, but in a good way. I like the book ending of the day with finding your passions and knowing yourself. But her talk is more about finding your passions in order to start projects, and mine's more about finding yourself in order to not have an existential crisis and fall into disrepair. So do what you love, right? Everybody wanted to talk about this for like a minute. Everybody gave a talk about do what you love, and everybody made weird posters and posted them on Instagram and Pinterest or whatever. And do what you love, you interpret it however you want. Maybe it's like pursue your passions or quit your day job. But I love giving the like anti-do what you love talk to people. I do what I love what I do, it's great. But I also feel like so much of do what I love or do what you love makes people think that everything that they're doing is wrong, whatever it is. Because like anytime that somebody is doing something that is different than what you're doing, you self-examine and you go, oh my God, I should be doing that thing. That thing looks way cooler. What am I doing with my life? Everything's fucked. And I think that like some people are in a position to like quit everything and, you know, pursue their dreams or whatever, but so many of us aren't. And I also think that it's really immature to drop everything that you're doing and not looking at what's around you in order to like improve it before you decide to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And so like when I think about do what you love, one of the biggest things that a lot of people don't ask themselves in the beginning is, you know, what do I love, which then leads to who am I, which then leads to, oh my God, I don't know who I am, and your existential crisis around that. And this all starts when we're really little because we all get asked this question, what do you want to be when you grow up, from like the second that we're verbal, right? And your parents make assumptions about what you want to be when you grow up based on like the two things that you're interested in when you are in preschool. And they're like, I do it already to my daughter already because she has inherited my husband's like genealogy and is clearly like a 30-year-old angsty engineer trapped in a 3-year-old's body. And so I'm like, oh, well, clearly she's going to like manage a hospital someday, or like, you know, whatever is the thing where she gets to just roll her eyes at the unintelligence of other people. And but this question, what do you want to be when you grow up, is really about who do you want to be when you grow up, not what do you want to be. Because, you know, career is really important, but it's really just important to keep in touch with who we are. And part of that is examining who you were, who you are right here and right now. And ultimately, those two things feed into who you're going to be. And so most of my talk today is about actually the fact that, like, the biggest path to destruction in careers, in life, in whatever, is figuring out who you are and then thinking that it's a set thing, where you just are unchanged forever and you're on cruise control, and that person that you diagnosed yourself at 16 is the same person you are when you're 30, is the same person you are when you're 40. Or the dream that you had, the career that you wanted when you were 20, when you were 24, is the thing that you want to be when you grow up. And if you just like move blindly towards that goal without looking at what's around you, without thinking about who you are in that moment and as you're growing, what you're gonna do is you're gonna get to that goal and realize that somewhere along that path, that goal, your goal has shifted and you didn't realize it, and that goal means nothing to you now because that's the goal of a different person, because you're a different person than you were when you set that goal. So some of the tools that I have, I grew up on trying to understand myself. I love introspective thinking. I think a lot about myself. You could call it narcissism, but it could also be really, fun and interesting and good. And so one of the first things that we learn when we're little, I don't know if this is as true everywhere in the world, but people always want to tell you your astrological sign like really early on. So I feel like in like 3rd or 4th grade, everyone like makes a big deal about the fact that you're like an Aries, or, oh, you're such a Pisces, or whatever. And it's just a way for them to like dismiss or point out a thing that you're doing that's like prototypical of you. And I am an Aries, but as a kid, I was an outrageously shy kid. I was really sensitive, and I would cry over anything. I couldn't take criticism. And being an Aries is all about being this like stubborn, ballsy, fiery person. And I think it took like very long into my life to like own the role of Aries. And I love astrology because I feel like it's either like a self-fulfilling prophecy where people are like super into it and then they bend themselves into that role, or it's an amazing tool for like confirming or denying things about yourself. I actually think a lot of things like this, these witchy nonsense things, are super good for that, because you read something about yourself, like in this birthdays book, which was very popular in the 90s. I don't know if it made it over here, but everybody had like a crazy aunt that was like super into the birthdays book and needed to look up everyone in your family and like send you photocopied things through the mail of what your birthday was and like who your new boyfriend was and how you're not compatible or whatever. And these things are so good because basically you read them, and if you feel any idea of self or any sense of self whatsoever, you read it and you go, oh, that sounds like me, or you go, oh, that doesn't sound like me. And what you do is you walk away saying, I know myself better than this book knows me, which I think can be really powerful. This was the exact placemat that was in the Chinese restaurant that we went to all the time as a kid when I was growing up. I'm a year of the rat baby, having been born in 1984. But the only thing that I learned about this, because I feel like I really like paid attention to it when I was like 12 or 13, is that my mom is a year of the horse, and apparently that means that we'll never get along forever. And so I used that as fuel for my like teenage disdainment of my parents, because they're both horse people. Does anyone know their love languages? Like, oh, this is a new thing. The love languages are kind of new, but these are actually very useful. This is totally in like the lady self-help section of bookstores. So like, I would say, unless you are like have someone in your life that's like, one of these like vision board kind of people, you probably might not know your love languages, but these are actually like incredibly useful tools that I did not even get. I was like, fuck this, like they don't know me. But then I have family members who are like obsessed with like basically without telling me exactly how much money they spend on me for gifts. So they'll like go to these elaborate lengths to like explain how difficult acquiring a gift was and how like they had to spend all this blah blah blah, and I'm just like, you're materialistic, like I'm like trying to get to the root of it, and I'm like, oh, their love language is gifts. They're just trying to show to me how much they love me by basically like telling me how much money they're spending on me. And that's not my love language. That's at like the bottom of mine, which is why they get frustrated and have to go like way deep into the explanation of what they spent on me. So it's just these sorts of stuff can be really good for actually like helping you navigate. And what they're mostly good for is, you see them in business settings all the time. Like, who here knows their Myers-Briggs? Very popular among the San Francisco /startup-y zone. Like I was at this conference called Off in Barcelona. And I was out to dinner with this dude from LA who was like more of like an artsy guy, and then two of my friends and my husband that happened to be from San Francisco. And the San Francisco people literally had a conversation about Myers-Briggs for an hour and a half. And the guy in LA was like, this is just a Bay Area thing, I think. Like, I don't know what this is about. But I really love Myers-Briggs as long as you don't use it in a damaging way, which is to like have this be your personality type and be totally shut off to change or understanding that you can evolve over time. But it's really good for actually understanding that people operate in different ways, and that if you and somebody don't seem to be jiving, it might just be because like they process things differently and they reenact with the world in a totally different way than you. And it's about them being empathetic to you about how you interact with the world, and also you being empathetic to them about how they interact. Like, my daughter is 3.5 right now. She's definitely an I, and I'm definitely an E. And my husband's an I, and our relationship is awesome because I get to travel all over the world and speak at conferences, and he's like happy to not travel all over the world and be in front of lots of strangers. But my daughter gets very frustrated because she has chosen me as her person, and she just wants to like me to stare at her like within 8 inches of her face for like 10 hours a day and run away with her and never talk to anyone else again. And as an extrovert, I'm like bumblebeing around, and she clearly just gets very frustrated that I can't necessarily give her the depth of attention that another I can give her, perhaps. The Enneagram test is another. I'm a helper personality type. I haven't researched this one like super intensely other than taking the test for myself. I started reading some of the other ones because someone called me a 3, which is like basically the crazy like dominant leader personality that sounds like kind of a psychopath. And I was like, all of these sound terrible. But then when I actually ended up being like a helper, I was like, oh, that one's okay. This one was like, of course, after I read it, because it explains so much behavior that I had already been keeping track of. Like, if you are on the subway platform and you stare at the subway map for like a little bit too long, I am like a part of your day now, like trying to figure out where you're going. I'm helping you like navigate the whole system. This is like an actual story. I was coming out of the BART, which is like our subway system in San Francisco, and a couple that were both blind had walked out of the BART and had overshot their BART stop like by several stops, and they told me, they were like, do you know how to get to blah, blah, blah? We've been riding BART like all day and keep missing the thing. And like, I was with them for like an hour. We're calling Ubers together. Like, I totally called an Uber for them to take them where they were going, and I just can't stop it, which is like, that's the positive manifestation of the helper. The negative manifestation is when I insert myself into every person's conversation, trying to like contribute something or help them. There were two like 24-year-old women that were like sitting next to me at a cafe, and I'm clearly pregnant at the time right now, and I'm also in my mid-30s, and they were like, oh my God, it's like I don't even go out anymore. It's like I'm 30. And I was like, hey guys, just so you know, like, you can be 30 with multiple children and still do fun things. And they were like, shut the fuck up. Like, they were just not having it. So sometimes you just need to butt out. So I'm going to kind of go through a timeline of like how I have gotten to know myself over time. I lived in New York from 2007 to 2012, and this was like an incredibly formative time for me. I kind of also lived in New York from 2012 to 2015 because I was like bi-coastal for a little bit. But this is when my Aries like really came out, I think. I graduated from college in 2006, and I went to school for design, and I felt like I found my thing because I was always like an artist without an opinion, and design was like my way in before I started having opinions as a grown-up. Because I was like, I'm 18 or I'm 20, nobody trusts, like, I don't want to do art about my feelings because my feelings don't matter because I'm 22. So I want to make art for other people and solve problems, and that's where design really helped me out. And I was so obsessed with work that like I fit in so easily in New York, because New York, is now, I feel like, getting over a bit of its obsession with work culture. But at the time, it might be like an age thing too, but at the time it was like, everybody was just bragging about how burnt out they were all the time. And like, I had a studio that I went to after my day job, and I was working like 90 hours a week. I would go into the studio, or I'd go to my job at 9, leave at 6, go into my studio at 7, work until 1 or 2 in the morning, and then repeat that the next day, and then work at least 1 full day over the weekend. And it was all so normal, like all of my friends did the same thing. And I felt like, work really defined me. One of the reasons why it did, it was like one of the things in my life that I did that was only mine. I felt like I had to really fight for independence as like a teenager, and had, I just really wanted to carve out a place in the world that was just mine and nobody else really had an impact on. I paid for college myself and like had built this career out of nothing from like 2 parents that like were not involved in art at all. And, it felt like I needed to do everything I could to make this thing happen. So I was working for Louise Feely. This is some of the work that I was doing while with her. And then again at night, I would go home and have this whole second career of freelance work because I really wanted to be a freelance illustrator. I was so into it, and also like my day job and my night job were different enough that I didn't burn out quite as fast as other people that continue to do this very similar work at night than they do during the day. And so when people would talk to me about like work-life balance, it wasn't like work-life balance, it was work life. Like work life was my work-life balance. I was like, all my friends are designers. All I do is go to design events. It's great. I have a studio with all of my friends. We go out for sandwiches in the afternoon. We work until 1 in the morning, and then we go home. And like that, can be sustainable for a certain period of time, but it's certainly not sustainable forever. And I think when you're like in your early 20s, you forget that life happens at some point, and that there are things that you'll have to prepare for, and there's like stuff that's going to go on in your life that is not that. And I'm very grateful that I moved to San Francisco before I had children, so that I had a little bit of a life adjustment, but I'll talk about that in a minute. So if you asked me at that point, like, who am I would have led with something about my career. I'm a design illustrator, or I'm, I made up a bunch of words about the amalgam of things that I did for a living. And it makes sense because it's literally like the only thing that defined me at the time. Like, it's the only thing about me that was interesting because I wasn't doing anything else. I didn't have any hobbies. I didn't have other things going on. I was like, every second of my day that I could work, I was working. I started this project after I quit my day job just to like keep doing lettering called Daily Drop Cap, and that became like a daily thing that I would do, a meditation. And that's really what work was. It was a meditation for me. But I realized after the fact that so much of the reason why work had dominated my life, not just because I was sort of hiding in it and that it was this like therapy for me and that it was this like commitment to being independent, it's also because of this question that I hadn't thought a lot about, but is fucking everywhere in New York. What are you working on? Anytime that you see someone that you're friends with, that you're like deeply in a good friendly relationship with, it's not, hey, how are you? It's, what are you working on? And I find it still now, like I go back to New York and it's still one of the first questions that comes up with people that I've known for 10 years or more, and this question is really hard because it makes you want to have something interesting to say every single time. So it's very motivating, but it also is a difficult question if you aren't working on something that's like a passion project or whatever at the time. And I didn't realize how big of an impact something like this very small social interaction had on me until I moved to San Francisco. So I moved to San Francisco in 2012 because my husband got hired by Facebook. He dragged me there kicking and screaming. He's now no longer at Facebook. He is doing his own thing now. So I'm the sole breadwinner again, really into it. Love that position, would do it all the time. But San Francisco was a really difficult adjustment for me for so many reasons. For one thing, like being in a cafe and listening to people talk about their like Series A, blah, 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 over and over again was like so cute and fun and interesting and cool and weird at first. And now it's just like, just have an office and talk about money at your office, Jesus Christ. And so like now every time I go into a coffee shop and people aren't talking about just totally innocuous life things like music or whatever, I'm just like, I'm so done with startup talk at offices, whatever, or at coffee shops. And also, so many of my friends worked for companies, and a lot of these companies were like more mature at the time, so they were like working normal hours, not like insane early startup hours, getting off work at 6 or 7 o'clock, having dinner with friends, all this kind of stuff. And so my life adjusted from like a 24-hour workday to a 9-to-5 workday just because I had no friends that were working that kind of crazy schedule, and it just felt weird to turn down social invitations because I was like interested in working on a Friday night or something like that. And so slowly over time, my work schedule got cut down to be like a really normal schedule, which was really uncomfortable at first because when you work more normal hours, you have a lot more time for introspection and for actually thinking about like, why am I taking this on? Like, what kind of projects do I want to do? Like, why am I just plugging forward? Because when you're working all the time and super busy all the time, you just don't have time to think about it. And busyness in itself feels like success. You know, like when you're constantly busy, whatever it is that you're doing, you feel successful because you're in demand, because you're cashing those checks, whatever. And when you're not busy all the time, it can be really easy to feel that like imposter syndrome and feel that you're doing it wrong. And so much of this, like this what are you working on question, just didn't exist there. It was, how are you? You know, like I would see my friends and they would go, how are you? And I would lead with what I was working on. I'd be like, oh, great, I have this new project. I'm working with Wes Anderson, blah, blah, blah. But every time that I did it, I would feel sort of weird. I'm like, oh, well, I feel like I was just like bragging about my work all of a sudden instead of talking about my life. And I realized like how important it is just to have a life outside of work and to have interests outside of work. Because this like work life was no longer possible. Like it was no longer achievable just because I didn't have a social sphere that supported it. I could have kept going at it, but it's really hard for me. I'm like a social creature and I'd feed off the energy of other people. And I definitely like, as much as I love being like a leader in ways, like I love also doing things that other people are doing. I like kind of going with the flow. And it was really hard to go with the flow. So work-life separation became very, very real. And I was doing work that I was really proud of. I had a lot of cool projects happen during that time. These are some ads I did for Starbucks and these wine labels for this cool vineyard in Oregon called Mahonia, and I'm still doing stuff for them. I've done some covers for Dave Eggers. I did a huge series of books for Barnes & Noble. I did this massive series of covers for Penguin called Penguin Drop Caps, where it was based on my daily drop cap project. And this art director, Paul Buckley, actually reached out to me about a year and a half before the project happened, saying that he was trying to pitch the Daily Drop Cap as a classic series. And I was like, sure, Paul, whenever that happens, let me know. And then sure enough, it like happened. And then I had to do these 26 covers and read 26 books in a year and a half. And it was like super fun, but a huge challenge. I worked on the titles for Moonrise Kingdom for Wes Anderson. I've done stuff for Criterion. I did stuff for the Oscars that got killed, but I still got to go to the Oscars, and that was pretty cool. You know, like all of this work, you know, when I look back at it, I'm like, oh, I'm really proud of the work that I did at that time. But I felt like I was going through a total existential crisis because I was like, oh my God, like, what does this all mean? Does it mean anything anymore? Like, does anyone even care about the work that I'm doing? I'm just selling toothpaste or like whatever. And everybody has that, especially if you do like commercial client work, because, you know, you are ultimately like helping to sell something. You know, it's the goal of a lot of the things that you do. And of course, you're trying to like bring joy and delight into people's lives as much as you can. But when you actually have time to sort of examine the work that you're doing and figuring out, like, am I contributing to society? Is this all just gonna like end up in a garbage bin somewhere? The answer is yes to the second one. It's really tough. And then I had my daughter in 2015, and another shift happened because work-life became work-life. And anybody with children in the room, does anybody here have children? Children are cool, lots of people with kids, yes, super cool. America is an interesting place to have children. We don't have the support system that a lot of places have over here, so I spend $80,000 a year on childcare. It's very exciting. But I'm very happy that this happened, like that I had kids after I made that big adjustment to San Francisco, just because like it would have been such a shock had it happened if I was in New York. You know, if I went from working this like 90-hour week to just like barely working at all. This is like my before and after work schedule of before kids and after kids. Like now I work about 35 hours a week, which is kind of like a light full-time work week. And so much of my day is just like commuting to my office. And I choose to do this because I know how fleeting this all is going to be. Like, I think it's so funny, like when I talk to folks that are just out of college or whatever, they think about 5 years as being an eternity away. You know, like it is just like, oh my God, I can't think of like I can't believe I'm gonna plug away at this for 5 years and still barely be recognized in the industry. And now 5 years feels like a blink. Like it feels so fast. So I make choices about the life that I want to have based on the circumstance that I'm in right now. And I think that that's something that like a lot of people have to think about, and that a lot of people have a hard time adjusting to, and make adjustments, or they think about their lives in terms of what they think empirically they should be doing, not what they should be doing for their unique set of circumstances. So I get asked a lot by women in design, you know, young women being like, do you ever feel guilty about not spending as much time with your kids because you have a career or whatever? And I say, absolutely not. I optimize for spending as much time as I can with my kids. If anything, I feel, you know, guilty a little bit about spending less time on my career, but not actually, because am I gonna regret the job that I turned down 2 years down the line? No. Like, I'm not gonna look back at my inbox and say like, oh, I really wish I had time to do that project that seemed pretty cool, that paid a decent amount of money, and instead missed like some pivotal moment in my kids' lives, because this is all gonna be a blink. When I moved to San Francisco, 2.5 years later, someone called me and was like, hey Jess, I'm outside your studio, do you wanna get lunch? And they were outside of my studio in Brooklyn, because this is a close friend of mine that didn't realize I had moved. And so like, you can literally drop off the planet for 2 years and no one will care. So like, which is very sad, but also very comforting. So if you're like in the middle of a weird creative rut, or like wanna go work at some early stage startup to get like a bunch of equity that is a really boring startup, but you're like, whatever, I wanna make $1 million in 2 years to 4 years. Like, you go do that, because no one will give a fuck. No one will care that you're gone for 2 years, and when you go back to doing something crazy and interesting, you'll have like this awesome thing that you did for a couple of years that helps you out for like the next 10, which is great. During that time also, this thing started happening where almost every project that I had this crazy NDA where I couldn't talk about anything that I was working on. There are companies currently that sometimes I work for that I'm never allowed to say that I worked for, and that I'm never allowed to show the work on any capacity, and they don't even pay at the same level that they did 5 years ago, but it's a thing. And so like, these NDAs can be so toxic for a person that's constantly accumulating new client work, because it means that if I'm working on a lot of really crazy big projects that are all NDA'd, my portfolio, I have nothing to post on the internet for years. So like, unless I'm doing self-authored stuff, which I can do when I don't have a newborn. So my Instagram from 2015 to 2016 looked a little something like this. I was still totally working. I only took off like 3 months of work when I had my daughter, and I was plugging away at work, but it was on all this stuff that had like a 1.5 years until release timeline, and I couldn't show anything, and I had to talk to their like PR rollout, blah, 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 while I was working on it. And it meant that I was getting a lot of emails that looked like this. So when my daughter was like 13 months old, I would get emails from art directors saying like, hey Jess, I don't know if you're back at work yet, but I have this project that you might be good for. And for every email that I got that said this, there were like 20 emails that never got sent to me. And the only reason I know about this is because I have a male studio mate who also has kids, and like, he was getting calls on the day that he was going into the hospital with his wife, that I heard him arguing with the art directors on the phone, being like, no, we're about to have a baby, I can't do sketches by Wednesday. And then he'd be like, no, not by Friday either. You know, like it's a very different. If you would have asked me when I was 28, has being a woman impacted your career, I would have been like, only in the best way possible. Because I'd be like, everyone wants me here. I get to go on stage all the time because no one wants another white guy. And like, it's like literally my inbox is just flooded with like, be in our magazine, be on our stage, whatever. And I think being a woman has had a really good impact for that, because people do want more female voices. They want more female leaders. But once I had my kids, I started going, oh, okay, now I understand. Because now I get people that say, oh, don't you work from home now that you have kids? No, I have a studio like I always have had. Oh, don't you whatever? And they make assumptions about me because maybe it's the choice they would have made, or maybe it's the choice that they've seen colleagues make. But I think that that just doesn't happen for men. That's why I feel like if anybody here in the room wants to be a conference organizer, like, or FITC wants to do like a special conference of this, I want to see a dad's conference. I want to see a conference of only dads talking about being dads. Because I feel like I get a lot of women that are like, oh, thanks for talking about your kids on stage. And I was like, thanks, but I want to hear dads talk about their kids. Because dads have kids too. And I know a lot of dads that do a ton for their kids. They're like definitely Mr. Mom in their house. And they never talk about it because they have a real separation. And I think it's really important. It's an important thing for women and men to see. So during this time, there was this like invisible darkness that I was experiencing. And it was, part of it was this like my work drying up a bunch because of the NDA situation and posting too many pictures of my daughter on the internet. And part of it, which I did not understand until much later, was that I was actually in the throes of super intense postpartum depression and did not realize it. Because it didn't set in until I was 4 months postpartum. So when you are pregnant and you have a baby, you have an appointment 6 weeks after, and they go, how do you feel? And you go, I feel pretty good. And they go, great, see you in a year. And then that's it, and there's no other checkup. And so when my daughter was 4 months old, I started feeling kind of like anxious about stuff. And then when she was 9 months old and I weaned her, the anxiety got super out of hand, where I was having like looping thoughts all day long and had horrible insomnia. And thank God I live in California, and after I was done breastfeeding was just like indica blah blah all night long. But I just like, I hunkered down and I didn't do anything about it because I was like, oh, it's gonna fade, whatever. And it took like 4 months for it to go away. But then when I had my son, it started at 4 months, but then it kept going for the same exact amount of time until he was 13 or 14 months old. And it was just, it's so difficult to have to like manage your life and your kids and all that kind of stuff while you are just like a wiry ball of anxiety, or however it manifests. And like now that I'm pregnant again, if you guys can't tell, I like did not just have an enormous meal. You know, I have these like awesome, these are like the 3 people. The last one's the mushy, weird 3D photo that they give you. That's what he currently looks like, the like mud baby. But I will tell you, I am terrified about what's gonna happen in 6 months, you know, like when I hit that again. And it's a huge thing that I thought about before we were like gonna have this, you know, get pregnant again. I was just like, I don't know if I can go through it again. That was so hard. And I've been like talking to my therapist, like, oh, I'm gonna go on medication this time. I swear I'm going to. But this is the kind of stuff that like totally throws you for a loop. But one thing that it's really good for is that when you are in that kind of crisis is that you realize like you have to do whatever you have to do to get through that thing that you're doing. And it makes you really understand that like the choices that you make have to be specific to the circumstance that you're in. You have to be malleable to like, you know what, I'm not in a good state of mind right now, so I'm not going to take on this like insane, weird project where I'm getting all the red flag vibes from this client. You know, it makes me take on safer work, you know, work that I know that I'm really good at and not the stuff that's really experimental, just because I need to fortify myself and I need to do the stuff that feels right in that moment. And like I was talking to Emily a little bit about Pilates, not deeply, but we should really bro down about Pilates. But I like love Pilates, and one of my big introductions to it was I've always sucked at yoga. Like I feel like I get really competitive at yoga, and I'm not very stretchy as a human. And when I went into Pilates, like one of the first things that happened to me was like the teacher of the class, who's clearly like some weird body guru person, was just like, I'm gonna work at a level 1 today because my hamstrings feel tight. Here's what level 1 and level 2 and level 3 is, but I'm gonna work at a level 1. And this idea of working at whatever level your body is that day totally blew my mind, you know, in terms of like not just feeling like everything that you do ever is about leveling up. You know, like maybe you're at a level 10 professionally right now, but next week, maybe you want to work at a level 2 because that's the level that you're at that week. And I think that's so important to like stay in touch with what we need in the moment and actually making those adjustments to what we need in the moment. Because I think otherwise we feel so disappointed that we're not hitting the level that we've achieved. And it's not like a video game. It's not like once you achieve a certain thing professionally that every time you fail, you go back to that stopgap where you got that gold coin or whatever. You just have to really pay attention and play to the level that you are. And so all of this gave me like a huge existential crisis of the who am I? And I had to do a lot of thinking about what I wanted to do and what I wanted my career to look like for so many reasons. But one of them was just because the landscape of lettering really changed. When I first started doing lettering professionally, it was 2008. And now it is like a crazy industry. But at the time in America, there were a handful of designers that were doing, or lettering artists that were doing lettering that were known specifically for it. And then it grew and it grew and grew until now you can't spit on the internet without hitting someone that's doing lettering and calligraphy. And so Lauren, this is me. There's me and Lauren. Hi, Lauren, if she's around. But now it's this really big world, and people are always trying to think about how do I diversify myself? How do I stand out in a sea of people? And I still really love commercial lettering. This is all stuff that I've done in the last couple of years that I'm really proud of and I love to do. But when it comes to actually standing on solid ground and figuring out the work that I'm actually best at, you have to really ask yourself at every stage in your life, what are your strengths? And what are your weaknesses? And then how do you leverage those strengths to have the biggest impact and find personal fulfillment? So there are things that I'm good at that no matter how jealous I get of childless people that are super enthusiastic and working 90 hours a week on whatever it is they're doing, they don't have some of the skills that I have, having been in this industry for as long as I have, even though I feel very young in this industry. But it's important for me to sort of look at both of those things and just accept them. A weakness doesn't have to be something that you have to battle out of you if it's something that you've struggled with your whole life. It's just something that you have to accept, and you have to actually go into client relationships and go into anything saying hey, I typically do this and flake at this stage, so I'm gonna try not to do that, but I'm gonna make you aware that I do that occasionally. And trying to set yourself up for success by doing the things where you get to use your strengths more and that your weaknesses aren't as big of a part of that project. So when I was thinking about what are my strengths and what are my weaknesses, logo type work is something that I feel is a huge strength of someone as a lettering artist, but also someone with experience in the field that understands how actually client relationships work, something that someone with a graphic design background knows a lot more about than someone without a graphic design background. And type is something that is such a crazy, amazing, nerdy world, and it just takes so much time to absorb all of the information and put it into practice that it makes sense that it's not something that people that are fresh into lettering would get really into. But also, I'm not going to try to lie to myself that, being a logo designer is the same thing as a branding agency. And I think that trying to figure out how to make logos while still being an individual person, doing big work, because at this point, the kind of clients that come to me are bigger name clients. I actually don't get a lot of requests from really small businesses or mom and pop businesses because they assume I'm too expensive. I still like to do that kind of work, and I do stuff for barter and stuff all the time. But if I know that the kind of clients that are going to come to me are going to be these bigger clients, how do I offer the work that I do while staying small as a business? Because it's not my dream to grow my studio. I don't want to have a 50-person studio in 10 years. That's not my goal. I love being a single one-woman studio because I love having creative control over the work that I do, and I really like actually doing the creative work myself. Because I think the only way to grow your studio is to give up a lot of that control and let other people do a lot of the production. And honestly, there is nothing more zen to me than sitting around listening to a true crime podcast and just vectorizing shit for 9 hours. I joke constantly. I go to therapy once a week now. I don't think I would have to go to therapy at all if I could just spend more time doing vector work. Because I just sit there I'm my blood pressure must be 0 while I'm doing it. It's crazy. I do not have a low resting pulse because I exercise in only anaerobic ways and I'm not a natural athlete. But I think my resting pulse is at least 10 or 12 beats lower when I am doing vectorizing work. And so much of this is about staying flexible, being able to respond to, who I am in the moment and what I need in the moment, being able to take off 3 days of work because I'm actually sick and I should not be doing that work, or being able to like randomly pick up and go to a conference or something like that, and be able to shuffle my stuff around. If I had a staff and if I had people under me, it would be a lot harder to do that. I'd have this real obligation to show up and be there, and the kind of accounts that you can't just shuffle away from. So this idea of brand refresh work has become something that is a big part of my business, and I really love it because it is a way for me to utilize all of my super specialized skills and do the kind of work that I want to do. And it all started from when I worked on the original MailChimp redo a couple years ago. So they had asked me to help them take this logo that they used like a free font to make at the very infancy of their business and just make it like invisibly better. They were like, we can't deviate from it too much because people are so used to seeing it, but we want to make it look like a grown-up logo and not like, a logo that we made out of a free font. And when I did that, I made these little graphics that I put on my site because I wanted people to know the work that I did. So I didn't design the original one, I designed the updated one, and I wanted to explain the thinking behind it. Because with this kind of work, actually explaining your thinking is incredibly powerful, and I find that clients respond to it so much. Because if a client is gonna hire you and spend like $20,000 to do super minute changes on a logo that only like 2% of the population are gonna notice, if you give them all of those nerd tools to like regurgitate back at their investors or whatever, they're gonna be so grateful for you. So I end up explaining so much about branding just when I like do these projects with clients. They've since abandoned this logo, but I can't get mad at it because they have this like fantastic, I don't know if oh no, it's a JPEG. Rats. I exported my thing as a JPEG because I was afraid my fonts wouldn't show up, but now this doesn't show up, so sorry about that. But you guys should go online and check out the new revise of MailChimp, which I did not do, so it's fine that it's not in my deck. But it's fucking brilliant, and it's so good, and people ask me if I'm mad about it, but I can't get mad because they did a really amazing job, and it's not just like a vanilla sans serif, and it actually solves a huge issue that the company had, which was making their monkey icon work with a logotype. So because I found this like client education so powerful with getting people to actually get on board with my decisions that I was making and getting them to really feel involved in the process, I ended up making this like logo evaluation handbook that I front load all of my first round decks with. And what it does is it just explains every single thing that I'm going to be looking at when I look at criticizing a logo and making technical and design updates to it. And clients come to me for different reasons. Some of them have logos that need like a little more overhauling, and sometimes it's really minor. And what I'll do is like in that very first round, I'll go through and like write out like, here are the things I would change and why I would change them. And I talk through them really, really technical typographic things. Like here's like this bit looks like it's drawn with a different pen. This part looks like the pen rested on the page a little bit longer and it's less speedy. I want to make it feel like it has a similar speed. With Jenny's, one of their big concerns was we don't want it to look like penis anymore. And so explaining to them why their logo looked like penis and that as cute as it was to have an apostrophe in place of the dot on the I, that was the problem. And so I really, really love being able to do this because as soon as you point it out, it's like amazing. It's like a magic tool giving someone the eyes to see this typographic nerdiness. Because once you point it out, they can't unsee it. And it's so fun. And then they're just like, all of a sudden, it like blows open a hole in their head because they're like, oh my God, this is everywhere, and then they go into the world and they have these tools now to like look at all of the things around them and assess them. And I love this work so much. It's like so precise and so nerdy. And a lot of times, like, I'm working with other artists' assets and I'm not having that like big like strategy, vision stuff that a lot of like logo design, branding designers love doing. Like that's like the core of brand work is like all of that like strategy and like vision for the company and la la la. And I was trying to figure out like what I love so much about this other than like it being really cool to see logos that you've worked on, like on actual guitars and things like that. And then I thought about it for a second and I was like, oh, it's because I'm a helper. Like the reason why I loved it so much is like I built teaching into my process. Like teaching is the process. And that's the reason why this stuff works. And so while all of these like personality things like are tools and they can be useful. Some of them are like witchy. I actually love tarot cards. Like, I don't know if you guys get down with tarot, but like tarot cards are awesome introspection tools as long as you don't read the future. Like if you're reading the future on tarot cards, like who knows? But there's like a way that you can read them that's just about examining the present. And all that it is, it's like a deck of cards that makes you ask questions about yourself. Even stuff like fucking crystals. So like, I live in California now, so I'm surrounded by like crazy woo-woo nonsense all the time. And like I'd like to say that I love to vacation on Woo Island, but I would never live there. And I have some friends that like live thoroughly on Woo Island, or they have like a timeshare there and they'll end up there eventually in retirement. But like all of these things are just tools. Like crystals, I don't think that they're magic. I don't think they cure things. But you know what I do love to do? Hold shiny objects in my hands and have an excuse to buy an $8 shiny thing. And then also too, I'll go into like a crystal store or whatever, and I'll be like, oh, I want an excuse to buy a shiny thing. What do I need right now? And then I read all the descriptions, and it's very fun to read them. And then I'm just like, oh, this one says that it's for like managing your emotions and feeling more even-keeled. This week's been kind of crazy. I'm gonna buy that one. And I actually feel like that act is really powerful, because what you're doing is you're acknowledging that there's a thing that you're going through that's worth addressing. So like that's what I feel is the power of crystals. It's like about setting intentions, and it's about actually acknowledging that there's shit inside of you that is off kilter that you want to work on, and we all need these tools. We all need tools to think about ourselves, because it's really easy to just get lost in the sauce and not actually spend time doing this. And once you do actually spend time doing this, it's really difficult to actually find focus and not feel totally overwhelmed. So that's why. So if you ask me who I am now, like my answer is not a design illustrator. It is like so much more complicated and crazy than that. Just because like as we evolve and get richer and take on these different roles, we become so much more layered as people. And I think it's really difficult to understand how multifaceted every single person on earth is. Like when you see people on stage, or you see people that are talking about whatever successes they've had, or you're on the internet and you're looking at the person that makes that crazy emotion stuff that you think is bananas, and you're like fuck that person, I'll never make that. Like, you never know what's going on behind the scenes of anyone's life, or all the stuff that they deal with. Almost every time I talk to someone that's in their 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever, they're going through some serious stuff on their personal side while they're managing all their career stuff. And it's so easy when you see people like killing it not to like understand that. And not to really grasp that, and not to give people the space to be human beings when you're working with them. And so like, the reason why it's so important to do this stuff is because you can't actually answer like what do I love, or do what you love, until you actually understand yourself, because only then can you find out like what do I truly love to do. And if I had to break it down, it would be draw, teach, and make people happy. Like those are the three things that if I can hit 2 of those 3 things in every single thing that I do in life, I am golden. And if I can hit all 3, then I'm just like on cloud 9. That's like all of the things together. And so the last thing that I'll tell you guys about is my kids' book that they'll be selling and signing afterwards. But when you are an illustrator, creative person, and you draw pictures for a living, almost everybody asks you like, oh, are you going to make a kids' book? And my answer prior to having kids was like, I don't know, maybe. And part of that, I don't like to make research projects. I like to make projects that are reactions to life experiences or passions that I'm interested in or whatever. And this book just came out of this experience of parenting. And when you have kids, like it brings up so much stuff about yourself when you're younger. You get to like relive your childhood through their experience. And I thought, and I had written it when just my daughter was around. Now I have a son, and then this will be like kid number 3 here, as I mentioned. But I was writing this book for who she is, but also for who I was. And I was thinking so much about all of my hopes for my daughter and my kids and all kids. Like, what are the things that I have only now just learned as an adult, or have a hard time grappling with as an adult, that are these like super basic things that we just need to get hammered into us over and over again. And so when I was thinking about all my hopes for her, I was thinking about all the positive things that I hope that she can become or, like encounter at some point in her life, like kindness and like, strength and all these kind of things. And then I also thought about all the things that get in the way of that, like just like the fear of messing up. Like, I see it already in her. I was so afraid of messing up as a kid that there were so many activities I didn't even try because I didn't think I would be good at them. Or like I had a pediatrician tell me when I was like 5 years old or 6 years old or something offhand. I think he was actually talking to my mom, like, oh man, don't sign that kid up for cross country. Her knees are shaped weird, so she'll just get stress fractures like crazy. I have never run more than a mile in my whole life because some shitty pediatrician when I was 5 years old told me this fact. And I think like it's so important to understand how big of an impact the tiniest bit of discouragement or the tiniest bit of anxiety or the tiniest bit of self-doubt can have in terms of people like achieving what they want to do. And so like empowering is something that I'm super focused on. And part of it is like, empowering just for kids, but I'm already doing this so much in my career because I get emails like this all the time. Like this is like excerpted from a single email, but I get like dozens and dozens of these emails a year where it's like a creative person that's writing me because they're having like a crisis and they're burnt out and they don't know what to do. And they're like, you seem really accessible and like you'd like to talk to people. Will you give me any advice that you have? And I love writing people back these like epic 10-paragraph emails of like, here's every piece of advice that I have for your unique situation, because it makes me, I'm number two, it makes me feel it makes me feel useful, and it makes me feel like all of this, whatever happens to my work, whether it goes in the garbage or helps sell candy bars or whatever, that it's all worth it if I can like help people in some way. And I was thinking a lot about the books that I had growing up. I'm totally gonna cry now because I'm like underslept and pregnant. And so like, I was thinking about the books that I had when I was growing up. And I didn't think of myself as much of a reader, but like, this is just me being pregnant, I swear. But like, like The Giving Tree, clearly like a book that so many of us read as kids that help us like understand this idea of, like someone giving all that they have to someone. Or like Ferdinand, the book, just this idea that you can like not be the person that destiny feels that you should be. This bull that is like, born to be gentle. Like that's so cool and so deep. And then Harold and the Purple Crayon, I mean like creating a universe of the things that you need and feeling like you have the power to do that. That's like totally outrageous. All right, gathering the stuff. Let me show you the pony dance to lighten things up. So the pony dance happens when I get really, really pumped about something, and it looks like this. It happens automatically. Like I did not invent the dance. The dance happened to me. And then every time that I do it, like my friends get super pumped. Like my husband gets really excited when I pony dance because he knows that like something real has happened. So yeah. So I'm just gonna end by reading my book, which I won't cry during because I've read it enough at this point. So Tomorrow I'll Be Brave. And so this is really like a culmination of all these things together. It's about, encouraging kids, but also introducing this concept of self-forgiveness. Because I think that like, you just can't hear that enough as a kid. Like, and the reason why it's tomorrow I'll be and not today I'll be is because I think a lot of us are super good. Oh, thank you. Do I have a boogie or something? A lot of us are super good at setting intentions for the day. Like we wake up and we go, I'm gonna do these things, but then we don't build in the time to reflect on whether or not we achieved those things. And that's why the idea of it being tomorrow I'll be and not today I'll be started, because I wanted to create this closed loop. This idea that at the end of the day, you're setting intentions for the next day, and then also reviewing the intentions that you set the night before and asking yourself whether or not you were those things. And then forgiving yourself if you weren't, because we can never be all the things we set out to be. But it doesn't matter because there's always tomorrow to try again. Tomorrow I'll be adventurous. I'll play and I'll explore. I'll make or learn or try something I've never done before. Tomorrow I'll be strong. I'll climb and jump and run. It doesn't matter if I win as long as I have fun. Tomorrow I'll be smart. I'll think before I act. I'll solve a puzzle, read a book, and learn a fun new fact. Tomorrow I'll be curious. Please teach me something new. I'll ask why 1,000,000 times, maybe 1,000,000 too. Tomorrow I'll be creative. I'll color and draw for hours. I'll play a game of make-believe and use my magic powers. Tomorrow I'll be confident. I'll be proud of all I know. I'll stop and smile and think about how much you've helped me grow. Tomorrow I'll be brave. There's nothing I can't do. I won't be scared, but if I am, I know that I have you. Tomorrow I'll be all the things I tried to be today, and if I wasn't one of them, I know that it's okay. But tonight I'm very sleepy, so now it's time to rest. Tomorrow I'll be all these things, or at least I'll try my best. Thank you.